Yeah. So while the history of feminine assertion and even feminism seems to have a longer history, right? And one of the earliest statements of feminism in the West is Mary Wollstonecraft's very important book uh, that you might have heard of, right? In the beginning of, I think she was contemporary of Kant and Hegel. So as back as that, but feminism as a social movement, right, seems to have its beginning only after World War One. And when we say social or political movement, we mean that it involved mobilization of large section of people, right? And after World War One, when there was huge devastation of societies that happened in the West, and women had to uh, go into those spaces that were earlier reserved for men, right? Because men lost their lives in the war. So these spaces women started occupying, and that brought in a certain awareness of rights. And so what is known as the first wave of feminism is about certain rights of women, especially uh, regarding suffrage or right to vote, right? So the earliest movement in feminism began as a movement for right to vote. And this is the period where you even find important theorists of feminism emerging, like Virginia Woolf, whom we are going to discuss today. Digvijay has a question from psychoanalysis. Yeah, go ahead, Digvijay.
Yes, sir. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sir, in the last class, when we were discussing the influence of psychoanalysis on literary criticism, we discussed how Freud talks about this notion of creative writer and daydreaming.
Mm,
And there we talked about how the writer, the creative writer, uh, through literature expresses the unconscious.
mm.
Uh, and my
Or
question
it,
was like,
mm, mm.
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So, if literature happens to be this expression of the unconscious, uh, what is it that separates an artist from the audience, which which tries to relate to the work of art? How is the artist able to create a work of art and not somebody else? And I read M.H. Abrams, where Abrams mentions that Freud has this notion of the author having this power to sublimate, and you you have read Abrams's entry on psychoanalysis, right?
Yeah, I think so. It's combination of psychoanalysis and psychology, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. So he
Yeah.
he
So
talks
what's your
about this
question?
notion of, yeah. My question is, how what separates the uh, creative writer from the common or ordinary person, who is not able to express his unconscious through literature, and on the other hand, you have the artist doing that.
Yes, and that's precisely where Freud admits his inability, and in the very same essay, right, to
Okay.
explain why that happens. Plus, literature is not a deliberate expression of unconscious. So it's not that author decides, चलो आज मैं अपना unconscious express करता हूँ. It's not like that.
Mm.
Even in the conscious stuff that he is expressing or she is expressing, you find that the appeal of the work comes from certain unconscious elements that are worked into the text, right? And that is parallel to daydreaming, where most of your unconscious hidden wish fulfillments and desires happen in your mind, right? And that is also similar to how dreams work. So there is a parallelism between literary writing, dreams, and fantasy. But what Freud says he is not able to explain is that how does the author convert this unconscious content into uh, literary work, right? That process
Yes.
is not understood according to Freud. So before creative writer, he says that I have psychoanalysis has to give up its arms. ऐसा कुछ phrase है उसका. So
Okay.
it is part of creative process rather than author deliberately expressing his or her unconscious. And secondly, how is audience different from the author is in the sense that audience lacks those skills which Freud is unable to understand to convert their unconscious desires into literary texts, right? So this
Mhm.
is what this ability separates author from the audience. Plus audience is on the side of consumption rather than creative process, right? So
Yes.
creative
Yes.
writers and daydreaming is about creative writing, while reader is not given primacy in Freud, though he says that the appeal of popular fiction, bad fiction usually according to him, lies in wish fulfillment and escapism that literature provides. But he is not able to explain the process through which authors transform that material into literary text. So that is what he says. Does that in some way address your
Yes.
question?
Yes. Yes. So we are not able to situate this in the like the framework that we took from uh, Horace, I guess, where we talked about genius and technique. So this notion of like, yeah, Freud is confused, or he has no answer to this.
Yeah.
Okay.
And plus
Fine.
besides, reader response also took upon some of the ideas from psychoanalysis, especially people like Norman Holland, 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 Norman Holland. He says that literary texts are realizations of authors, not authors unconscious, but as Freud argues, but readers unconscious. So his famous book
Okay.
by Norman Holland is called Hamlet, My Greatest Creation, right? And he's taking a kind of
Hmm.
he's emphasizing how readers produce the meaning and the texts. And so literary interpretation is seen to be as an expression of readers' unconscious, right?
Okay.
So that is a later development. So I didn't discuss it. I was just sticking to the classical psychoanalysis of Freud, just like we
Mhm.
stuck to classical analysis by Marx because of
Yes. Yes.
time framework. The later developments we couldn't discuss at length because that's outside the scope as well for you. Because unless you
Yes.
understand reader response theory and developments, you won't be able to understand psychoanalytical approaches there.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Jaldi. Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Right. So we discussed previously that his influence can be seen in D.H. Lawrence's novels and etc.
Mhm.
So how does it like how exactly is his influence seen? Because I realize it's a longish kind of question, but like just in a
Not a
few
very
lines, if you
longish
could.
question because the emphasis given on unconscious irrational life by Freud as a primary driving force or motive of human life is taken on in depiction of characters, right? So characters are not rationally driven. That's one way. Secondly, the whole psychosexual side of your unconscious and attachment to mother. In fact, one of the very famous novel by D.H. Lawrence is Sons and Lovers, where he talks about
Yes.
how influence of mother becomes a kind of problem for the son to relate to his wife, right? So how mother as a figure uh, seems to dominate male child's unconscious, masculine unconscious, and all those ideas and emphasis on sexuality that you find in D.H. Lawrence, right? I am talking about D.H. Lawrence as a classic example of psychoanalysis because he was very influenced by that, and he talks about sexuality and bordering on pornography in those times. That's why his very famous book called Lady Chatterley's Lover was banned, and there was an obscenity trial against him. So you can see that the whole sexuality unconscious, mother father figures dominating unconscious lives, affecting people's relations in conscious life, becomes themes of so many novels. But D.H. Lawrence is a classic example of Freudian influence.
Right. Also, sir, can stream of consciousness novels like one we are going to discuss, Virginia Woolf, can this be related to Freud's idea of the unconscious? Because
Yes,
it does
yeah, it
sound
does connect. And where it connects is Freud's idea of free association, right? Free association as a method for diagnosing the issues that mental health patient has parallels with this stream of consciousness. So what Freud was interested in the stream of consciousness of the patient. So you can find unconscious symbolism or the repressed or the problems in the repression that the patient faced. So you find parallels to that because the emphasis shifts on the inner subjective unconscious domains of human psyche, something which becomes the focus of uh, 20th century modernist fiction like that of James Joyce, as well as Virginia Woolf, whom we are going to talk about today.
all
But
right,
I'm
sir.
not
That
sure
is
whether they were deliberately adopting those ideas. But yes, you can see that they're seeing these ideas became prominent after.
so. Were these people, James Joyce and Woolf, for that matter, were these people aware of Freud's ideas?
I think they were, but I'm not sure to what extent. Right. Uh,
Right. Right.
I'm sure they were because Freud was such a major influence
It's
of the
yeah,
20th century.
kind of a
It
revolution.
was a
Yes.
scandal of the time. Right.
Yes. Yes.
But there was no new media in those days. So, but being very scholarly and intellectuals like Joyce and Virginia Woolf, I'm sure they would have read something by Freud.
Yes, because it's very fluid. I have happened to I have read like a little bit of Virginia Woolf and then I put it aside because I got a headache. But yeah, the idea is that
What?
I
You
don't think
you happened what? I failed to catch the last line.
I happened to put it aside because I couldn't grasp what she was trying. Like I couldn't connect the dots, and I assumed that I'm not yet qualified enough to read it.
So now after the
So
discussions, you can read her.
I'm going to try again, definitely, but I don't know because again, it is all haphazard in a sense.
Right? You can
So
read Orlando and To the Lighthouse. You can also check
I
out her
have,
short stories.
yes. So the book I picked up was The Waves, and it
Waves.
left me.
I
It
have
is.
not read that. Waves and
I
Mrs.
yeah.
Dalloway somehow I haven't read, but I
Yes.
have read
Mrs. Zan.
The Lighthouse because we were forced to as part of our syllabus. Yes, yeah, and I liked it. It's a good novel. And Orlando as part of teaching. I taught Orlando, so that's how I read it. I found it very fascinating. We'll talk about Orlando as
Yes. Yes. Her books definitely intrigue the interest. That's like given, but
well.
again, there's it kind of challenges the reader in the sense that I personally wasn't able to connect the dots. Like, kya ho raha hai? You cannot just figure out. It's like watching a movie, but yeah, like anyway,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's my
Plus, another way that Freud influenced later writing was the emphasis on surreal imagery. Surrealism as a movement and Dadaism as a movement emerged after World War, but there was a distinctive Freudian agenda. For example, French authors, painters, and poets like André Breton and Christian Zara. These are the founders of the avant-garde Dadaist movement and surreal movement, they had a distinctive Freudian kind of emphasis. In fact, André Breton argued that it's the dream-like unconscious imagery of dreams becomes a model for the poets to produce. So poems are not statements of rational argument or a coherent discourse, but a kind of irrational flow of images which are startling, right? Like say, for example, there is a painting, I don't remember who did that, but there is a bird's nest in somebody's mouth with an egg in it, right? So the things that are don't make any rational, coherent sense became the mode of expression for surreal painters like Dali, but also poets like Breton and his followers. In fact, they found in Freud a kind of attack on Enlightenment rationality, and which was mainstream, and that is for them the reason for the downfall of the Western civilization, as exemplified in the world wars, especially the Second World War. So they see rationalist kind of hegemony of reason as being a cause for the downfall of Western civilization, and going back to the instinctual unconscious life became one of the ways of critiquing this rationalism for Dadaism as well as surrealism. And Dadaism, there is a very famous poem called How to Write a Dadaist Poem by Tristan Tzara in Paris. And he says that cut words from newspapers, put them in a hat, mix them properly, and lay them out randomly without reading. And whatever is there in front of you is the Dadaist poem. So they emphasize this chance, unpredictability, and irrational imagery as the technique for poetic expression. So that is also seen in the choice of the name that they have given to their movements. So what they did was they opened up a dictionary and randomly put a finger, and a finger fell on the word called Dada. So that's how they named their movement as Dadaism. Right. So you can see that this kind of emphasis on anti-rationalism, irrationalism, is definitely kind of Freudian influence on later poetry. So if you look at 20th century poetry after Eliot, it tends to become free association rather than a reasoned argument. And the question that Jaldi brought up, that you're not able to understand what Virginia Woolf is trying to say, is because the free association and irrational movement of our stream of consciousness is what she is trying to put forth, rather than tell you something. Ye message hai, ye moral hai. There is no message and moral like that overtly given. So reading Virginia Woolf and James Joyce is a challenging task because there is no logical, rational organization of the text, like you find in most of the popular fiction, जहाँ पे एक plot होता है और एक twist होती है, surprise ending होता है, कोई sensational events होते हैं. That is the formula for popular fiction, right? So Virginia Woolf develops a critique of realism, especially the popular realism of Galsworthy and Bennett and H.G. Wells, who were probably most popular novelists of that time, right? And she admires James Joyce for some reason, and then she also discovers that she hates him as well. Whatever that may be, that's a personal thing. But it seems that in what you find in Virginia Woolf is coming together of modernism, avant-garde modernism, and feminism. They converge. So you can call it a kind of modernist feminism that you find in Virginia Woolf, right? And when we say feminism, I just mentioned the first wave of feminism that began with this post-war scenario and the suffrage movement, and its counterpart in theory and criticism can be Virginia Woolf, right? So there are waves of feminism. The second wave of feminism is to be seen after Second World War, which you may call the postmodern feminism, if you want to like it, if you want to call it so. But they don't use that phrase for some reason. But it can be exemplified in the writings of Simone de Beauvoir, who is using existential psychoanalysis, existentialism of her companion Jean-Paul Sartre, and Hegelian dialectic, especially master-servant dialectic that we have been discussed, and pointing out how woman is other. And she also emphasizes that women are not born, they are made, right? And that comes from the existential philosophy of the times, which believed that existence precedes essence. That's the statement. Have you heard of this statement? Existence precedes essence. That's the formula given by Jean-Paul Sartre. Yeah. Yeah. Essentialism. Yes, tinge of absurdism as well, Jaldi. You are right. But this is absurd. Unconscious is absurd, right? So unconscious. How many of you feel that the dreams that you saw were absurd? I will just come in one moment. Just start thinking about this. Half a minute. Not Yes, Tavan, I'm not going there. You are right. But the question that I'm asking is, what do you understand of this slogan given by Sartre, that existence precedes essence? What does that even mean? Yes, Tavan, you may.
Sir, actually, Sartre, by that statement, existence precedes essence, he meant that there is no predetermined fate or destiny that has been given to us, objectively, as, maybe Plato, Aristotle, or even the modern people used to believe. He meant that it's us who, define our essences. Like, it's not that I am, if, for example, first people believe that, okay, a person is born for a particular task or particular thing, or there is a particular nature of a person that cannot be changed. But Sartre opposed that whole idea. He said that we are born meaningless in this world, and then we give meaning to our own lives.
Right, and we make who we are through our actions and choices. Right.
Yes,
So
he kind of
choice
opposed
becomes
Aristotle and Plato.
choice becomes the most important idea in Sartrean existentialism, which says that everything is chosen. Means you cannot uh, get rid of that responsibility, because once you do away with God, then who you are is your own making, right? And your life, everything that happens in your life, you are responsible for it, and that becomes the burden of the responsibility. And that's why people want to escape from freedom. Freedom becomes burden. But the slogan, as you rightly pointed out, can be taken back to Plato, who said that ये जो पेन है, ये real pen नहीं है. It exists, but it's not real pen. So existence and essence of the pen, essence is the form that is in our heads, idea. So essence दिमाग में होता है, right? And this is just existence, B, right? So existence comes first according to people like even Aristotle to some extent, because Aristotle is saying that the essence and the existence are together. Pen as reality, as the existence, substance exists in front of you, independently of you, right? सो एग्जिस्टेंस एंड एसेंस साथ में ही होते हैं. पेन का एग्जिस्टेंस और एसेंस अलग नहीं होता. एसेंस यानी व्हाट इट इज, राइट, एंड एग्जिस्टेंस यानी दैट इट इज. सो दैट इट इज देयर, दिस पेन इज देयर, is existence. But what is it? It is a pen. So that is its essence. So essence in human self, it is different, and that is what Heidegger argued. And Sartre was deeply influenced by Heidegger, right? And Heidegger said that the essence and existence, the essence is not what makes pen a pen. He's saying that the being of the pen is different. So Heidegger reformulates this existence, essence. He actually is attacking Aristotelian philosophy of substances. But the point here is that Sartre is emphasizing that whoever you are, if you say you are a coward, right, for example, then you are responsible for that cowardliness because you have chosen to be coward. Does that make any sense? क्योंकि भगवान तो है नहीं बनाने वाला किसी को. आप जैसे हो उसके लिए सिर्फ आप ही जिम्मेदार हो सकते हैं, दूसरा कोई नहीं. So translating it into feminism, Simone de Beauvoir says, and this book appeared in 1949 after World War II, that women are not born, they are made, right? And she emphasizes how politics of patriarchy constructs, imposes femininity in some way, and women have to resist all this imposition of these things. So women are not essentially women, but they are a social construct, cultural construct. That's what Simone de Beauvoir is saying. So with that becomes the second wave of feminism, right? So you can see that there is a separation, clear-cut separation of gender and sex that seems to happen after Simone de Beauvoir. And later on, the third wave of feminism, maybe in the 90s, started questioning again essence of gender. Can you think of woman as an essential homogeneous gender? Because a black woman has a different kind of issues of patriarchy, and a tribal woman would have a different kind of questions as femininity. So idea of gender as essence was being criticized, even including Judith Butler, who points out that gender is not an essence, but it is performative, right? And what she means by that is that there is a script that people perform, their gender. And she's talking about not just women, she's also talking of men and all genders, right? So she is trying to overcome the binary between masculine and feminine, pointing out that both are performative. And when you say performative, means you are acting, right? एक script है, एक role है, which is forced upon you by the society, patriarchy, which you are trying to perform. And in the performance are the effects. Therefore, gender is not performance, but gender is performative, is what Judith Butler argues. And that is a recent gender theory, right? Okay. But when we go, yes, that is what she means. Women as an essential category is what the third wave feminism critiques. So the question of upper caste women and Dalit women won't be the same. Their experience of oppression and kind of things that they have to face is very different, because they are multiple times marginalized, right? So upper caste woman is marginalized as a woman, but a Dalit woman is marginalized 2 or 3 times because even, yeah, that's intersectionality becomes the key issue of the third wave feminism, and the idea that gender is performative. So this is an overview of three waves of feminism, and Virginia Woolf belongs to the first wave, where women were thought of as essential category, right? As, and gender sex difference भी बहुत ज़्यादा emphasize नहीं किया गया था means in her own life, Virginia Woolf experienced the difference between gender and sex because she herself had homosexual or bisexual kind of orientation, and her relation with a woman becomes the theme of her novel Orlando. But going back to Virginia Woolf, I am just putting her in a historical context, right? She is the main feminist theorist of the first wave of feminism, and that is what we are going to limit ourselves to, right? Is that clear? We are not going to look at second wave and third wave because we don't have that much time, because very often the second wave and the third wave are influenced by post-structuralism or post-structural feminism or post-structural psychoanalysis and so on and so forth, right? So I'm, or Althusser's structuralist notion of ideology, all those are important influence for the third wave feminism, and the second wave feminism is as well. Stavan, we have a month, but are you willing to study everything in feminism? But then to discuss structuralism and post-structuralism भी तो करना पड़ेगा ना. तू MA कर ले, तेरे को सब मिल जाएगा. प्रिस्क्राइब्ड सिलेबस है सब. MA के लिए कुछ छोड़. I have put 2 videos of structuralism and post-Derridian deconstruction, so you can watch that as a preface. And I will post more videos of structuralism as well, right, Stavan? And then if you have questions, then we can discuss. So watch those videos. Preface to the masters. Okay. Okay, so let's go back to Virginia Woolf. Virginia Woolf is one of the leading modernist novelists, right? To the Lighthouse is one of the most important novels of 20th century, along with Mrs. Dalloway and Waves and Orlando. So, and when it comes to feminism, very often I have seen that there is also a kind of Jahil understanding of feminism. I don't know if you have heard of this, and very often from very privileged women that I have heard this. And this Jahil idea of feminism says that feminism is about man hating men, and therefore I am not a feminist. I am not a feminist, ऐसा मैंने सुना है. Pseudo feminism is another problem. I am talking of people who say that feminism is about hating men, therefore I am not a feminist. ऐसे celebrities बहुत कहते हैं, तो उनके लिए जाहिल ऐसा वर्ड मैंने कॉइन किया है. Pseudo feminism is something else. It means that you pretend to be a feminist, but jahilism is when you disown feminism by believing that it's about hating men, it's about male bashing, when it has no feminist philosopher thinker has ever, right from Mary Wollstonecraft Jr. से लेकर जूडिथ बटलर तक कोई फेमिनिस्ट ने ऐसा नहीं कहा है कि फेमिनिज्म इज अबाउट हेटिंग मेन. सो दिस एंड इट गोज बैक टू यू नो फर्स्ट सेमेस्टर में हम जब डिस्कस कर रहे थे दैट सर्टेन टर्मिनोलॉजी दैट वी यूज is technical as versus popular everyday colloquial understanding of those ideas. So we have to make this distinction. Yeah. women want equality and not revenge. So it's not about revenge, right? So first thing you have to get that feminism's basic argument is patriarchy. That means that society and culture is skewed as a system in favor of men, as one gender, right? So that at the end of the day, men stands to gain, even when the war is between women, say for example, right? So patriarchy as a system does not mean that individual men beat women. It's not about men physically uh, beating women. They may be even treated with certain courtesy, but that also can be patriarchal, right? So patriarchy is the key idea which Virginia Woolf advances, and that is seen in certain historical deprivation of rights and justice uh, for women. Does that make any sense? That the history of Western civilization is a history of deprivation of rights and deprivation of justice for women in this, and obviously that means it's oppression and marginalization. And she puts forth an idea called Shakespeare's sister named Judith, right? Very interesting. And she argues that imagine Shakespeare had a sister who was equally capable as her talented genius brother, but she wouldn't be writing plays because people would be starting with her father and people at home opposing it, because women were deprived of education, right? Uh, she would be washing clothes for her father, mother, and brother. So she would not be considered as somebody who has right to express herself. She would be doing domestic chores. And at the end, Virginia Woolf says that she would have to commit suicide. And that becomes a kind of ironic and prophetic, because Virginia Woolf herself, right, put a lot of stones in her pocket and drowned herself in and killed herself. She committed suicide. So the story that imaginary story that she tells about Shakespeare's sister, in some way she played it out herself in her life by committing suicide, right? But the point that she's making, that Western, if I ask you who is the important Elizabethan playwright or a poet, then I don't think you will tell me names of women, है ना? हाँ ना, एलिजाबेथन, रेनेसा. तो ये रेनेसा था किसका? That is what Virginia Woolf is asking. Whose enlightenment, whose Renaissance is it? After all, whose modernity? Right? Is the question that she is posing to the entire Western civilization. Yes, cis het white males. Cis is a contemporary term for people whose gender and sex are considered appropriately linked by society, right? So cis, so technically straight, but what she is saying is that if you look at the canon of Western philosophy and literature, then women are at the receiving end. And if you look at even philosophy of Aristotle and Plato, there is a distinctive patriarchal bias and sexism and misogyny, which believes that women, and if you go back to Greek polis, last semester में हम जब start किया था, तो right to vote उनको था ही नहीं women को, right? Even if they were married to or mothers of cis white males, right? So women were deprived of most of the time of their rights, basic human rights. And that is why they were marginal. And so one of the tasks of feminism, according to Virginia Woolf, is to retrieve these marginal women writing, right? To look at the whole tradition of West, which has uh, excluded women. You have to, yes, to retrieve that history of women's voices. So these are some of the very influential ideas of feminism. So even if feminism has a range of approaches, most of them, they seem to agree on these points, that the Western civilization is deeply patriarchal and it has excluded women and women's voices, and women were repressed and oppressed and and at the receiving end of everything, right? That happened. War hota hai, kuch bhi durghatna hoti hai, to women were at the receiving end of everything. So if there is war, then women would be raped and killed. Western civilization is deeply patriarchal. Jaldi is asking, why is it so? Very difficult question to answer. I'm not very sure, but I will try. One answer was given by Engels, if you remember, how patriarchy constituted itself by uh, controlling property and women. Well, the question of legitimacy and property issues came together to control, regulate women, right? Especially women's sexuality. So that is one, with the rise of capitalism, that is one answer given by Engels. But I think that there is this whole, yes, yes. So the whole bias against women go back to actually the roots of Western culture. And Derrida would point out how Western civilization is not just logocentric. That means it not only privileges rational, ordered systems, but also is phallogocentric. That means it privileges uh, male hegemony. So in dichotomy between, we'll come to the question of language a bit later, but अभी यही patriarchy समझने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं, right? So patriarchy would mean that in the binary male female, woman was seen as the lack or absence of male qualities like strength, rationality, whatever. So Aristotle and others would see women as lack, while male would be seen as natural presence which is full of qualities. So it goes to the heart of Western thinking, according to Derrida, right? Very heart of Western thinking is uh, biased against, or it deprives women of their essences and everything. So these are the two reasons. एक एंगल्स ने दिया हुआ और दूसरा डेरिडा ने दिया हुआ. Jaldi, does that in some way help you to understand? I am not saying this is the last answer, but जो मैं जानता हूँ उससे मैं कह रहा हूँ.
Yes, sir, I understand what you're saying, but I just somehow cannot. Uh, it doesn't make sense to me in the sense that not the arguments, but the logic behind them.
Means क्या?
Like, sir, ऐसा कोई documented चीज तो है नहीं that women cannot think rationally. It's just a notion, and I do not understand how this notion, right from Aristotle or Plato, came to being, and it is still continued today. Like how
So that's what I'm saying. No?
okay.
ये जो बायस है, प्रेजुडिस है ना, तो वो वेस्टर्न फिलोसफी और थिंकिंग की शुरुआत से है. That is what Derrida is saying. It is built into
Yes,
the
and
Western thought, and it is a bias and it's a prejudice, right? Uh, Secondly,
yes, and
it has
it
something to do with capitalism, is what Engels is saying. So third answer would be the that male or masculinity is somehow far more violent. That's my common layman's observation. Destructive capabilities that men like to develop regarding the gender is is one of the most horrifying things that I've seen. Yes, so I think these are the things. So prejudice क्यों बना उसमें तू पूछ रही है लॉजिकल क्वेश्चन, मगर ये prejudice कभी लॉजिकल थोड़े ही होते हैं.
हाँ
Prejudice
सर,
is, it is representation of other as inferior or bad or wrong. तो वो politically constructed होते हैं, rational नहीं होते. And that's why feminism is political through and through.
Yes,
Right?
yes, definitely.
Yeah.
And it takes, the irony being, it takes one rational thinking man, if you will, to break this prejudice. I mean, if you're claiming that men are rationally able, then how much does it take to understand that your there is no logic in your argument? Like, anyway.
Yeah, so I think one of the ways out is women taking charge of their own life, right, and their own histories and their own inheritance, and trying to counter this masculinist, heteronormative, masculinist prejudice that is deeply ingrained in the West, right? And that's what Virginia Woolf is arguing, and she, in her very important lectures that she gave at Oxford to women in 1928, I'm sorry, at Cambridge, that's on page 6671, where she is arguing, and those essays are collected in two books. One is called A Room of One's Own, and second is Three Guineas. Her argument is that women have to find a room of their own. And by room of their own, it doesn't only mean that you should have your own privacy, right? But she is saying that women should have their own spaces, which are not imposed upon them by patriarchy. So woman should have a room of her own. That is the first thing. And by that she means the space where she can articulate who she is, right? Which is out of the compulsive power of patriarchy, which says औरतों को ऐसे ही होना चाहिए, ऐसे ही होना चाहिए, ऐसे ही होना चाहिए. And when I say patriarchy, remember, it is not only man who upholds patriarchy, right? Patriarchy is an ideology. So even women can uphold patriarchy, something that you should, I think, get. So it's not man versus woman. I hope you get that. Feminism doesn't have to be man versus woman. It can be
Yes,
women
sir,
against women, man against man, man against woman as well. Right. So it's because it's about the system of power, cultural civilizational system of power, right? And women can as much uphold patriarchy. Yes, right. Yes, Saloni. So it's never about man versus woman, and that is what I meant by Jahil idea of feminism, right? So what she's arguing, let's continue with what she's saying, and this is very important to the questions that are coming up, is financial independence and equality of wages for Virginia Woolf is the key to achieve breakthrough in this patriarchal setup, right? So if you want to attack patriarchy, then financial independence is something that is central into her project. So room of one's own is also the room that she owns, woman owns, right? Ownership है वो, खुद की room है वो. It's not a room given by men. Right. And remember, Stavan and Saloni, the whole question of multiplicity of genders, ये ज़्यादातर 70s और 80s में आता है, right? वर्जीनिया वुल्फ के टाइम पे ये आइडिया prominent नहीं था. So idea of multiple genders come up after lesbian feminism emerging as a counter very often to gay rights movement, because gay rights movement that emerged in 60s, it themselves became a kind of patriarchal in the sense that lesbian experience was marginalized. So in order to counter both heterosexual patriarchy as well as gay patriarchy, I hope you get what I'm saying. So lesbian literary criticism critiques patriarchy even within homosexual what should I say, movement, right? So that gave rise later to something called a queer movement. So queer is a critique of not just masculine and feminine, but also gay and lesbian. So queer includes whole range of sexual orientations, patterns, and expressions which don't fit into the masculine, the cis, what should I say, cis heteronormativity, right? So all these things came up later. History हमेशा ही याद रखना. So Virginia Woolf's arguments are early 20th century arguments, right? So that is why we are studying history of literary criticism and not literary criticism. So this is the first wave of literary criticism where she is arguing about the financial freedom being the key to women's movement, right? And the idea even today has certain weight, right? So when we are talking of Western male patriarchy, is Indian civilization and culture patriarchal? What do you think?
Yes, sir, definitely. It may be in different ways, but it is.
What do you say? What do others say? Yes, Saloni says yes, very much.
Sir, in fact, I had a request. Can we like hold a small discussion on uh, patriarchy slash feminism in India or in the Indian context?
Yeah.
Like,
So,
bec-
given the fact that Indian patriarchy, idea of Indian patriarchy comes up with Indian feminism, right? One of the accusations made against feminism in India is that it's a Western movement and it does not have much uh, relevance to Indian context, right? So that is one of the patriarchal arguments against Indian patriarchal arguments about फेमिनिज्म. सो फेमिनिज्म इज अ वेस्टर्न मूवमेंट. हमारे यहाँ तो कुछ ऐसा है ही नहीं. वो वेस्टर्न सिविक कल्चर का इन्फ्लुएंस है, राइट? दैट इज अ वेरी ऑफन रिपीटेड डिस्कोर्स. And feminism in India had to be contextualized. So it is only after 1975 that you see feminism as a movement emerging, right? Feminism as a thought existed earlier in India, right? You may find very aggressive feminist text in 19th century by a very interesting Marathi writer, Tarabai Shinde. And her book is called Stri Purush Tulna, comparison between men and women. That is 1890s में आने वाली बहुत ही सेमिनल फेमिनिस्ट टेक्स्ट है. इट इज इवन बिफोर किससे, वर्जीनिया वुल्फ से पहले 40 साल, राइट? सो यू कैन रीड दैट अप, ताराबाई शिंदे's स्त्री पुरुष तुलना. And there she brings up the question of caste as well, Stavan, because she is speaking from anti-Brahmin movement started by Jyotirao Phule, right? So you can read up Tarabai Shinde. And then you have many important voices like Lakshmibai Tilak, and then you also have Pandita Ramabai, very important feminism. And then in 70s, you find 1975 was declared as a year of women, and the status of women report was created in India by a commission, government commission, And the contradiction that it revealed, that though Prime Minister of India is woman, women in India are in terrible state of deprivation of all forms of oppression, right? So this awareness generated women's movement in India. And then by the time you reach 90s, women's feminist movement was largely critiqued by Dalit feminism, which argued that most of the feminist articulations in India were upper caste feminism, right? So there is a critique of upper caste feminism that happened by the Dalits, because they insisted that the question of caste cannot be overlooked in feminist movement. So intersectionality, so caste is a very important aspect of Indian feminism, right? So questions of class, caste, intersectionality cannot be overlooked. That is the newer thinking after 1990s about feminism in India. So you can look that up as well. So that is in short a kind of Indian feminist trajectory of Indian feminist movement. You can look up another book by Susie Tharu and K. Lalita called Women's Writing. There are 2 volumes, very old books, but very important anthologies of women's writing. Something which is similar to Virginia Woolf's belief that you should retrieve the marginalized voices and find out your own tradition, women's tradition. Yeah, Titiksha, go ahead.
Am I audible?
Yeah, your health is better.
Oh, it's better. I mean, I'm not really good with the
Yeah,
congestion
I
and
could
all.
see that.
It's
Yeah. So what is the question?
yeah. My question is, so in a country like ours, which has such rich culture and all, and it goes back, thousands and thousands of years.
Can you
In
come
the,
again? Last phrase I couldn't catch. Rich culture और उसके बाद के thousands of years. Okay, yeah, yeah.
and whenever, I mean, in today's context, this is something which I have personally observed. I'm not clearly audible, am I?
You are audible, but you have to be a bit clearer
Uh,
rather than audible. You are audible. Hmm. Yeah.
right.
Hmm. So I
So
got till we have got